The Zorvani Empire was a name that echoed through the stars with fear. Their advanced technology, their vast armies, their seemingly invincible power. For centuries, they had crushed planet after planet under their iron fist. No civilization had ever stood a chance against them. So, when they set their eyes on Earth, they believed it would be just another conquest, another easy victory in a long list of trophies. The Empire's fleet, composed of massive warships that blotted out the sky, descended on Earth with the kind of confidence that only comes from centuries of unquestioned dominance. They hovered above the planet, sending out their demands for surrender, their voices booming across the atmosphere through every frequency. Earth is under our control. Surrender now or face the consequences. At first, there was no response. The humans, it seemed, were either too scared or too stupid to resist. The Zorvani Empire had always relied on one simple fact: no species, no matter how advanced or proud, could hold out against their power. Earth's defenses were primitive at best. A few satellites, some outdated military technology, nothing the Empire couldn't dismantle in a matter of hours. Their fleet positioned itself in orbit, blocking out the sun, casting a shadow over the entire planet. The citizens of Earth watched from below, but there was no sign of panic. No sign of rebellion. There was only an eerie calm that settled over the planet, a silence that unnerved even the Zorvani commanders. They had been here before, on countless worlds, and each time, the people surrendered without a fight. But this time, something was different. The Empire's warships loomed overhead. Their commanders expected the usual response: swift submission. Instead, the humans did nothing. No protests. No weapons fired. No government resistance. At first, it seemed like a victory. Earth was theirs. The only question now was how quickly they could claim the resources and strip the planet of its valuable minerals and energy sources. But the more the Zorvani explored, the stranger things became. The cities were quiet, far too quiet. They expected bustling streets, crowds of people scurrying in fear, perhaps even a few pockets of resistance. But the streets were empty. Stores were closed, and buildings stood like lifeless monuments to a forgotten civilization. The Zorvani sent their soldiers to the ground, but still, there was no sign of the humans. Where were they? Surely, they hadn't simply given up. It didn't make sense. The humans were supposed to fight back, to resist, even if it meant their destruction. That was what the Zorvani had always experienced. But Earth was different. There were no warriors standing ready to defend their home. There were no secret weapons or advanced technology hidden beneath the surface. Only silence. The Empire's soldiers began their patrols, marching through deserted streets. They had taken control of the government buildings, the military bases, and the communications hubs. Everything was easy, effortless. But as they dug deeper, they began to notice strange things. Buildings that were supposed to be in one place were now missing. Streets that had once been there now ended in dead ends. It was as if the planet itself was playing tricks on them. They had landed on Earth expecting an easy conquest, but now they were beginning to feel like they had walked into a well-laid trap. The Empire didn't know it yet, but they had made a critical mistake. Earth wasn't empty, it was waiting. Everything on the surface had been designed to deceive, to lull them into a false sense of security. The humans had prepared for this moment for centuries, though the Zorvani had no idea. They thought they had won before the battle had even begun. The Empire's soldiers wandered through the cities, unaware that every corner, every building, every step they took was carefully orchestrated. The Zorvani were in control, but they didn't know that the planet was already playing them. They were the ones being hunted. Back in the Empire's command ship, General Varn, the fleet commander, watched the unfolding situation with growing concern. He had seen how quickly their forces could take control of a world, and yet something didn't sit right with him. The lack of resistance, the emptiness of the streets, it felt wrong. Varn had always trusted his instincts, and right now, they were screaming that Earth was not as simple as it appeared. He sent orders to tighten the perimeter, to double-check the security, but nothing came up. The Zorvani Empire was powerful, too powerful for a simple planet like Earth to resist. Yet, in his mind, something was gnawing at him, something he couldn't shake. As his forces moved deeper into the planet, it became clear that something had been planned. Small, subtle signs began to appear, shadows in the corners of their vision, strange electromagnetic pulses that fried their tech, anomalies in the atmosphere that sent their drones haywire. It was nothing they couldn't handle, nothing that warranted panic. But to Varn, it felt like Earth was waiting for something. It was a planet that had been built to lure in the invaders, to fool them into thinking they had already won. The humans weren't gone. They were simply waiting. And Varn knew it would be a mistake to think otherwise. But it was too late. The trap had already been set. The Zorvani Empire had walked right into it, and Earth's silence was only the beginning. The Zorvani Empire's forces were now entrenched across Earth. They controlled major cities, power stations, and communications networks with ease. Their warships hovered above, darkening the skies as their soldiers marched through abandoned streets, taking over one building after another. It all seemed too simple. There was no military counterattack, no government resistance, no desperate cries for help. Just silence. The human race, once known for its fierceness and determination. The Zorvani had expected resistance. They had expected rebellion. But there was none. It made no sense to them. The Zorvani commanders, accustomed to seeing defiance in the face of their conquests, were puzzled. Where were the humans? Where were the armies they had prepared for? Earth was supposed to be just another stepping stone in the Empire's path, but instead it felt like they were walking through a ghost world. As they advanced, the soldiers grew bolder, feeling their victory already in their grasp. With each passing day, more territory fell under their control. At first, the Zorvani believed the humans were hiding in some underground bunkers, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. But after weeks of searching, no hidden bases were found. There was no trace of human activity, no signs of life in the streets. It didn't take long before the invaders started to feel like they were the only ones alive on the planet. Every once in a while, a soldier would vanish, just disappear into thin air, leaving no trace. At first, it was brushed off as a simple mistake or an accident. But as more and more soldiers went missing, the unease among the ranks grew. General Varn, commander of the Zorvani fleet, was becoming increasingly frustrated. His forces had seized control of the most critical infrastructure on Earth, yet they had not found a single human to fight. The humans were simply gone. He had sent waves of scouts to search for hidden resistance, and yet all they found were empty buildings and silent cities. No weapons caches, no hidden bunkers. Nothing. His intelligence reports were baffling. Earth should have been teeming with people, ready to fight for their homes. But they weren't. Where were they all? Were they really so afraid? Or was there something more sinister at play? Varn ordered his soldiers to tighten their grip on the planet, to occupy every square inch of it. But still, the silence continued. No shots were fired. No bombs exploded. No messages of resistance came through the communication networks. The humans were not fighting back, not in the way the Zorvani had expected. It was as if they had simply disappeared. This unnerving quiet began to settle over the invaders, and even the most battle-hardened soldiers started to feel the weight of it. It was wrong. Something wasn't right. In the heart of the Empire's command ship, Varn stood before the large holographic map of Earth, analyzing the situation. It was so simple, so clean. The Empire had made no major mistakes. They had assumed control of Earth's infrastructure, and the planet was completely within their grasp. But it was too easy. There had to be something they were missing. He had known Earth's reputation. The humans were fierce. They were not a species that simply laid down and accepted defeat. Yet, here they were, not lifting a finger to fight. Varn had seen this kind of thing before, when enemies were broken, when their will to resist was crushed. But that was not what he was seeing on Earth. No, this felt different. He could feel the tension in the air. It was as if Earth was holding its breath, waiting for something. Varn called for his top intelligence officers and strategists. They gathered in the war room, where holographic screens floated in midair, showing the movement of their troops. He wanted answers. Where are the humans? he demanded, his voice sharp. "Where is the resistance? We have taken every major city, every key position. They are gone. All of them. No fighting, no attempts to escape. They've just disappeared." One of the officers, a young Zorvani named Rethar, stepped forward hesitantly. "We've scoured every part of the planet, sir. There's nothing. No organized resistance. No underground fighters. It's like the humans are gone. We've searched every city, every village. But the only thing we find are more empty streets." Varn's eyes narrowed. He didn't like this. He didn't like it at all. He had seen the same pattern on other worlds. The humans were supposed to be stubborn, unpredictable. Yet, they had not fought back in any way. There was no desperation in their actions. No calls for help. Nothing. It was as though they had simply accepted their fate. He stood up from his chair and walked toward the massive holographic map of Earth, his fingers brushing through the projections of major cities and military zones. The more he stared at the map, the more he realized that this wasn't some random occurrence. The humans weren't gone. They had simply vanished from the surface. They had retreated into the shadows. And now, the Empire was in their trap. The Zorvani were used to conquering worlds with overwhelming force, to crushing any resistance beneath their boots. But Earth was different. Earth was quiet. Earth was calculating. The humans had left no signs of rebellion, no overt acts of resistance. Yet Varn could feel it in his gut. Something was coming. The Empire had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated Earth. They had assumed that silence meant surrender. They had assumed that nothing meant victory. But silence meant something far more dangerous. The next day, something happened that sent a chill down the spines of every Zorvani officer. The sky above Earth shifted, a strange crackling noise in the atmosphere. Suddenly, the Zorvani fleet's communications system went down. Their drones started malfunctioning, their sensors going haywire. The invaders, who had once felt invincible, began to panic. A mysterious electromagnetic pulse rippled through the air, knocking out their systems. Then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went back to normal. The calm, eerie quiet returned. But this time, the Zorvani knew something was wrong. The humans weren't gone. They were waiting. And now, the trap was ready to spring. The Zorvani Empire's soldiers had grown too comfortable. They had occupied Earth for weeks now, and their belief in an easy victory had turned into a quiet arrogance. The planet, for all its beauty and resources, had been a simple conquest. Or so they thought. The humans, as the Empire's commanders had believed, had simply disappeared, leaving behind empty cities and abandoned homes. At first, the Zorvani were baffled, but with time, they dismissed their doubts. The silence became just another sign of victory. There were no more. Varn paced through the command ship's war room, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the table. The city maps flickered above him, showing the Zorvani positions, the quiet streets, and the empty military bases. But as he stared, he couldn't stop the nagging thought. Why hadn't the humans fought? Why hadn't they done anything? It didn't make sense. Humans were known for their persistence, their unwillingness to give up. And yet, all he saw was stillness. The feeling that something was off had started to grow stronger. Earth was too quiet. The humans had been waiting for something, waiting for them to let their guard down. Then it happened. Without warning, an enormous surge of electromagnetic interference flooded the Empire's communication systems. It started slowly at first, like static in the air. But soon, it escalated. The drones above the planet's surface, once so reliable, began to malfunction. Their sensors fizzled, their movements stuttered. The fleet's navigation system started glitching. Reports flooded in from the soldiers on the ground. Communications are down. Our sensors are failing. The drones are offline. It was as though Earth itself had awoken, and in the blink of an eye, the planet had become hostile. General Varn rushed to the command center, his face set in a grim mask. He had suspected this, but seeing it happen was something else entirely. He slammed his fist onto the table, causing the holographic map to shimmer. "What is happening?" he demanded. "This is no ordinary interference. Someone is controlling it." His voice was sharp with frustration. An officer, his eyes wide with panic, stammered, "Sir, it's the humans. They've done something. We can't communicate with our forces. Our tech is failing. It's like they've set a trap." A sickening realization gripped Varn's chest. "A trap," he muttered under his breath. For the first time since the Empire's arrival, the general felt fear creeping in. The humans weren't just hiding, they had been preparing. They had turned their planet into a perfect snare. And now, the Empire was walking right into it. Back on the surface, the humans were watching. They had been watching all along. Earth's people, long underestimated, had prepared for this day for centuries. They had studied their invaders, learned from their past mistakes, and bided their time. It was never about resisting outright. It was about surviving long enough to make the Empire believe they were defeated, only to turn the tables when the moment was right. And now, that moment had arrived. As the Zorvani soldiers scrambled to regain control of their technology, they found themselves facing an unexpected enemy. The streets of the cities were still empty, the buildings still deserted. But in the shadows, there was movement, quick, silent, and deadly. The humans had begun to strike, but in ways the Empire had never anticipated. They were using the very environment against the invaders. The humans had rigged the power grids, creating surges of electricity that fried Zorvani equipment. Their military communications were sabotaged, and their advanced drones malfunctioned as soon as they ventured too close to certain areas. The Empire's soldiers, once confident in their technology, now found themselves unable to rely on it. Their weapons faltered. Their vehicles stalled. Their communications became a mess of scrambled static. The Zorvani were forced to fall back, but with every step they took, they realized that the humans were always one step ahead. The streets, once silent and still, now seemed to be alive, shifting, closing in on them. It wasn't just technology that the humans had used, they had turned Earth itself into a weapon. Buildings that once seemed ordinary now hid traps, rooms full of explosive charges ready to detonate at a moment's notice. The very landscape had been transformed into an ever-tightening noose, a labyrinth of dangers the invaders couldn't understand. In the heart of one city, a small group of Zorvani soldiers moved cautiously through a neighborhood. Their eyes darted around, alert to every creak and whisper. They were beginning to realize the magnitude of their mistake. They had underestimated the humans, thinking they could take the planet without a fight. But now, they were trapped, caught in a web they couldn't see. The soldiers' movements became more frantic as they tried to communicate with each other, but their radios kept cutting out. The enemy was everywhere, yet nowhere. Shadows seemed to stretch across the streets, and every corner held a new danger. One soldier turned a corner and disappeared. Another was knocked down by a hidden blast. Panic began to set in among the ranks. They were no longer the hunters, they were the prey. Back in the command ship, General Varn's frustration turned into outright anger. "This is madness," he shouted, slamming his fist onto the table again. "We are the invincible Zorvani Empire. We do not lose to the likes of these humans." But his voice cracked slightly, betraying his rising panic. He had never experienced anything like this. He had never faced a foe that was not only willing to fight but knew how to turn the tables in such a cunning way. The Empire's forces were beginning to fracture. The once unshakable confidence that had accompanied their initial assault had evaporated, replaced by confusion and fear. The humans had not only survived the invasion, they were making it clear that they could still fight back, and they would not be easy to defeat. With every move the Zorvani made, the humans were closing the trap tighter, tightening their grip around the Empire's throat. Varn stood silent for a moment, his mind racing. He knew they couldn't win if this continued. His forces were trapped on a planet that was no longer just a world to conquer. It was a weapon, a prison, a trap. And they were walking right into its final stages. It was too late to retreat. The trap had already been set, and now it was closing in on them. The Zorvani Empire's soldiers had underestimated their enemy. They thought Earth would be an easy conquest, a quick march to victory with no resistance worth mentioning. But as the days passed, it became painfully clear that the humans had been preparing for this very moment. And now, with the trap closing in, the humans were responding. Their reaction was not one of fear, but of calculated fury, a fury born from years of watching, waiting, and learning from the mistakes of the past. It had started subtly at first. The humans had known from the beginning that a direct confrontation with the Empire would be suicide. The Zorvani were technologically superior, their fleets vast and powerful. But humans had something that the Zorvani never considered. They had endured countless challenges over the centuries, and they knew how to survive against overwhelming odds. Earth itself had become their weapon. From underground bunkers to hidden cities deep in the wilderness, the humans had built a network that the Zorvani could not see. They had rigged the planet's power grid to create electrical surges that would short-circuit the Zorvani's advanced technology. Their drones had been turned against them, hacked and reprogrammed to act as spies and saboteurs. Even the natural landscape had become a battlefield. The humans had studied the land, the cities, the very soil they walked on, and they had turned it into a perfect trap for their invaders. Every step the Zorvani took was met with another surprise. Every action they made was countered with a brilliant human strategy they hadn't anticipated. The Zorvani struggled to maintain control. The humans had begun to push back in small but powerful ways. A group of civilians in one city sabotaged an entire Zorvani supply chain, crippling their logistics for days. In another, a group of hackers infiltrated the Empire's communications network, sending false orders to confuse the invaders and sow discord among their ranks. It was chaos, and yet it was a precise kind of chaos, a carefully orchestrated response to an invasion that had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and fight back. General Varn stood in the command room, staring at the holographic maps of Earth, his frustration mounting. The once clear lines of Zorvani control were now frayed, dotted with pockets of resistance. The humans had managed to disrupt everything: their technology, their supply lines, and worst of all, their confidence. Varn had thought he could break the will of the humans with ease, but now he saw the full extent of his mistake. They were not just surviving, they were fighting back with a ferocity he had not expected. "We can't keep up with this," Varn muttered. "They're even turning our own machines against us." Varn turned away, his mind racing. He had expected a quick victory, a show of force that would scare the humans into submission. But what he saw now was not submission. It was defiance. The humans were not just surviving, they were fighting back with everything they had. And the Empire was slowly losing its grip on the planet. As the Zorvani forces retreated deeper into their strongholds, the humans began to take back what was theirs. In the ruins of once great cities, they gathered in secret. Ordinary citizens, former soldiers, and even children had come together, their ranks swelling by the day. They knew that time was running out, but they had a plan that was as brilliant as it was desperate. They would use the Empire's overconfidence against them. The Zorvani had spread themselves thin across the planet, assuming that Earth's inhabitants would never rise up. But now, the humans were closing in. A series of coordinated attacks began. It wasn't just the military anymore. The humans had taken the fight to every corner of Earth. In every city, every village, every mountain hideout, humans struck in unison, attacking the Zorvani where they were most vulnerable. They had learned how to fight as one, how to blend into their environment and strike swiftly. They didn't need an army, they needed unity, and they had it. One night, a small group of rebels infiltrated a Zorvani base, planting explosives that took out the supply lines for half the Empire's forces in the region. In another part of the world, a group of hackers managed to seize control of the Zorvani fleet's navigation system, causing confusion and chaos among the Empire's ships in orbit. Every move the Zorvani made was met with a counterattack from the humans, and with every loss, their morale eroded further. General Varn could no longer ignore the truth. His forces were being driven back. The Zorvani were losing the war they thought would be easy. Earth, a planet they once believed they could easily crush under their heel, had turned into a battleground of unyielding resistance. And the humans were not going to stop until they had reclaimed every inch of their world. The tipping point came when the humans launched a bold assault on the heart of the Empire's command center, deep in the underground bunkers. What began as a small skirmish quickly escalated into a full-scale battle. The Zorvani soldiers, despite their advanced weapons, were overwhelmed by the sheer determination of the humans. The rebels fought with the fury of those who had nothing left to lose, and with every passing minute, they pushed the invaders further back. As the battle raged on, the truth of humanity's response became undeniable. They were not just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for their planet, their future. The Zorvani had come to Earth expecting an easy victory, but they were learning the hard way that the humans would never surrender. And as the humans made their final push to reclaim Earth, it became clear that the Empire's grip on the planet was slipping, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. For the Zorvani, this was no longer just a war for conquest. It was a battle for their very survival. And as the humans tightened their grip, it was becoming clear that the tables had turned. The humans had responded not with surrender, but with the kind of fury and resourcefulness that could change the course of history. And the Zorvani were now paying the price for underestimating them. The Zorvani Empire had come to Earth thinking they could crush the planet in days, but now their once confident commanders were struggling to understand what had gone wrong. Earth, a world they thought was weak and unprepared, had turned into a nightmare. For every move they made, the humans had a response. And as the Zorvani looked at the vast stretches of land that they had once controlled, they realized one painful truth: they were trapped. There was no way out. The invaders had underestimated humanity's resolve. They had thought Earth's people would surrender, cower under the weight of their superior technology, and be quickly subdued. But instead, the humans had done the impossible. They had fought back. Not with advanced weapons or fleets of ships, but with their sheer will to survive and adapt. It wasn't just the military forces fighting back anymore. Every single person, from farmers to teachers, from mechanics to students, had become part of a growing rebellion. The Zorvani had walked into a trap, and now they were the ones who were caught. General Varn paced back and forth in his command center, his mind racing with thoughts of escape. Their ships were stranded, their supply lines severed, and their communications jammed. Every move the Empire made was met with fierce resistance. They had tried to escape Earth's atmosphere, but the humans had disabled most of their escape routes, using homemade tech that the Zorvani had not expected. The Empire's fleet was scattered, and in the chaos of battle, coordination had become nearly impossible. "I didn't think they had it in them," Varn muttered to himself, staring at the holographic map of the planet, now dotted with human-controlled zones. "We have lost contact with most of our forces. We are surrounded." Commander Zayal, ever the loyal officer, stood beside him, attempting to offer solution. "We still have our strongholds in the north and east, General. But the resistance is only growing stronger. The longer we wait, the more entrenched they become. I recommend we retreat to the central base and regroup." Varn's jaw tightened. Retreat. It wasn't a word he'd ever wanted to consider, but it was becoming the only option. However, the idea of retreating felt like admitting defeat. He had always prided himself on leading an unstoppable force, but now Earth's human resilience was proving to be a far greater challenge than he'd imagined. In the middle of the chaos, the humans were not sitting idly by, hoping the invaders would tire out. They were pushing forward. In the forests, hidden bunkers housed makeshift armies, using guerrilla tactics that the Zorvani were struggling to predict. In the cities, the humans had used their knowledge of the urban landscape to their advantage, turning every building, every street corner into a deadly ambush point. Even the environment itself had been weaponized, with humans setting traps in the wilderness that ensnared unsuspecting Zorvani soldiers. With each victory, the resistance grew bolder, more organized, and more confident that they could win. The Zorvani Empire, once so sure of its invincibility, was now on the back foot. But it wasn't just the human soldiers that made things difficult. The civilians were also fighting back. Earth's people had never been more united. Fear had turned into action, and every person who had once been an ordinary citizen was now a fighter, whether they wanted to be or not. They were all part of something larger than themselves, something much larger than the Empire had anticipated. While Varn's forces struggled to keep their footing, the humans were already planning their next strike. Across the planet, from the deserts to the mountains, the underground resistance forces were rising up. They had learned how to disable Zorvani technology and use it against them. The humans had figured out how to short-circuit their enemies' high-tech weapons, rendering them useless. They knew how to strike from the shadows, hitting where the invaders were weakest and vanishing before the Empire soldiers could retaliate. The Zorvani were facing a kind of warfare they had never seen before, one in which every person, no matter how small, played a part. In the chaos of their retreat, the invaders had been forced to deal with attacks from all angles. They could no longer track the humans' movements with ease. Their technology was failing them. Their enemies were too unpredictable. It all came to a head when Varn's command center was hit by a series of coordinated explosions. The lights flickered, and the once immense building shook with the force of the blasts. Panic spread through the ranks of the Empire soldiers. The humans had breached their last safe haven. No one was prepared for it. The Zorvani soldiers scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. The resistance had outsmarted them once again. General Varn was forced to make a decision, one he had hoped he would never have to make. His forces were dwindling, their communication with the outside world severed. Earth had become a battlefield of frustration and confusion, and the Empire's once imposing presence was now a mere shadow of its former glory. His fleet was immobilized, their supplies running low, and there were no safe routes left to escape. The humans had blocked every exit, every chance of retreat. There was no way out. The reality of the situation weighed heavily on Varn. The humans had turned his invasion into a complete disaster. What was once a well-planned and meticulously executed strike had spiraled into a nightmare. The Empire was trapped. The soldiers that had once been confident were now questioning their orders, their leadership, and even their ability to survive. Earth had become a perfect trap, and the Zorvani were now paying the price for underestimating the humans. In the darkened chambers of the command center, General Varn stood alone for a moment, contemplating the war that had slipped through his fingers. How could they have missed this? How could they have underestimated the humans? He had come to Earth believing that it would be an easy conquest, a stepping stone on the path to even greater glory for the Zorvani Empire. But now, as he looked out at the destruction around him, he understood the truth. There was no way out. Earth had become a prison, and the humans had turned the keys. With the Empire's forces scattered and their resources exhausted, Varn made the only choice he could. Earth had been lost. And as the humans closed in, there was no escaping the consequences of the Empire's arrogance. The trap had been set, and now it was closing in on them swiftly and mercilessly.